The wind howled across the barren planet, its icy gusts stirring the jagged rocks and deep craters that marked the landscape. A group of elite intergalactic hunters stood at the edge of a cliff, their high-tech cloaking devices blending them with the harsh environment, making them almost invisible. They had been tracking a dangerous, half-alien bat-like creature for days, a being known as Ruthless. It was their most coveted prize, a specimen so rare and powerful that it could bring riches beyond imagination. But this mission was about more than money. Ruthless had become a symbol of their superiority, a test of skill and dominance. The creature had once been a part of a peaceful alien race, but years of hunting and manipulation had turned him into a weapon. Ruthless was a mix of terrifying alien bat features and humanoid qualities. His wings, once majestic and graceful, were now ragged and torn from years of combat. His sharp claws and enhanced senses made him a deadly adversary. He was a survivor, but he was also marked by a deep sense of betrayal. The hunters were closing in, their advanced technology tracking his every movement. Their eye-guided drones hovered silently above the ground, scanning the area for any sign of the elusive creature. The leader of the group, a tall and imposing figure named Commander Jorik, raised his hand, signaling for the team to stop. His voice, cold and confident, crackled through the comms. "We found him. Prepare to engage." As the hunters advanced cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the rocky ground, Ruthless watched from the shadows. His glowing yellow eyes narrowed as he observed his hunters. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a growing sense of anger. He knew he was being hunted, but he wasn't going to make it easy for them. With a swift movement, Ruthless flapped his wings, rising into the air with astonishing speed. The hunters hadn't anticipated such agility. They scrambled to reposition themselves, but Ruthless was already out of their reach. Ruthless's wings beat with the strength of a storm, propelling him through the desolate landscape. He could hear the hunters' frantic commands as they tried to track him with their advanced sensors. He dove into a nearby canyon, the dark shadows of the rocks offering brief refuge. His heart pounded in his chest, but he wasn't afraid. He had been in worse situations before. He had fought countless battles, and every time he had survived. But this time felt different. He was different. The memories of his past flooded his mind. The once thriving alien city where he had been born, full of love and peace, had been destroyed by the very beings who now hunted him. His people had been slaughtered, and he had been taken, transformed into a weapon for others to control. But Ruthless had escaped. His survival was not by chance, but by his sheer will to live, to fight back. However, his anger had always been a quiet companion, and now it roared inside him like a beast ready to break free. The hunters were closing in. Ruthless's wings were growing tired, the wounds from previous battles still fresh. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long, but he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. He had unfinished business, and as much as he loathed the humans who had captured him, he would not let them have the satisfaction of his defeat, not when he still had the strength to fight back. A sudden noise broke his concentration. It was the unmistakable sound of a cloaked vehicle approaching. Ruthless froze, his keen senses picking up the vibrations in the ground. The hunters were deploying their most advanced weapon, a heavily armored dropship. The ship's engines hummed softly as it descended toward the canyon. Its cloaking system made it nearly invisible, but Ruthless could still feel its presence. He had no choice but to keep moving. His claws scraped the rocky surface as he made his way deeper into the canyon. The shadows grew longer, the silence more oppressive. Ruthless pushed forward, using the narrow gaps between the rocks to move silently, his mind calculating his next move. The hunter's presence had become a constant, like a shadow that followed him no matter how far he ran. They were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to capture him. But Ruthless had learned the art of survival. He would not make it easy for them. As the dropship hovered above, its lights sweeping the canyon floor, Ruthless made his move. With a burst of energy, he launched himself into the air, his wings slicing through the wind like blades. The ship's sensors detected him, and the hunters' voices crackled in his earpiece. There, he's above us. But Rathik was already gone, darting into a new shadow, vanishing once again from their sight. The hunters, now desperate, activated their tracking systems, using every tool at their disposal to locate the creature. The tension in the air was palpable. Rathik was playing a dangerous game, one where the stakes were his life and death. The hunters, skilled and ruthless, were closing in, but they underestimated him. Rathik could feel the storm coming. The atmosphere shifted, the air growing colder, the sky darkening with heavy clouds. A deadly storm was brewing, one that would make it nearly impossible for the hunters to continue their pursuit. But for Rathik, the storm was a blessing. It would give him the cover he needed to escape. But as the wind began to howl and the first raindrops fell, Rathik made a critical mistake. His wing, already injured from previous fights, caught on a jagged rock, and he tumbled to the ground with a painful thud. His heart raced as he struggled to regain his footing. The storm was picking up, but now Rathik was vulnerable. The hunters, sensing an opportunity, moved in quickly. They knew they had him cornered. In a desperate attempt to escape, Rathik tried to fly again, but his injured wing betrayed him. The hunters surrounded him, their weapons aimed at him, their faces hidden behind the masks of their suits. Rathik looked up at them, his eyes filled with a mix of defiance and pain. They had him now, but they had underestimated him. They had underestimated his will to survive. Commander Jorik stepped forward, his voice cold and final. "It's over, Rathik. You're done." But Rathik, battered and bloodied, didn't give in. He let out a growl that resonated through the canyon, a sound full of fury and pain. They had abandoned him once, but he wouldn't let them win this time. Not without a fight. As the hunters prepared to capture him, they didn't realize that this wasn't the end for Rathik. This was only the beginning. The creature they thought they had left to die was far more dangerous than they could ever imagine, and what would happen next would shock them all. The pain in Rathik's wing shot through him like a burning blade, but it wasn't the pain that mattered now. His mind was sharp, calculating, pushing through the agony. He had to survive, and he knew that escaping was his only chance. The hunters were closing in, their weapons trained on him, but he wasn't ready to give in. Not like this. His wings, once his greatest strength, were now a disadvantage. His body, battered from years of hunting and imprisonment, felt heavy, but his will was unbreakable. Rathik's glowing yellow eyes flickered with a fierce determination. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for revenge, for the memories of his people who had been destroyed by the same hunters who now sought to end him. He remembered the peaceful life he once had, the lush forests of his home planet, the days spent flying free, and the nights filled with songs of his people. It felt like a distant dream now, lost to the cold metal hands of his captors. But he had never forgotten, and now he would make them regret underestimating him. The storm howled around him, rain pouring down in sheets, blurring the hunter's vision. The darkness, once an enemy, was now his ally. Rathik, despite his injuries, used the storm to his advantage. The hunter's technology was powerful, but it wasn't perfect. Their tracking systems could sense his heat, but the rain and the thick fog obscured him. Rathik pushed himself to his feet, his claws digging into the muddy ground as he tried to steady his body. The hunters advanced, their movements calculated, but Rathik's agility was unmatched. With a roar, he leaped into the air, his remaining good wing catching the wind just enough to give him a brief lift. He didn't get far, but it was enough to throw off the hunter's aim. They fired, but the shots went wide, hitting the wet ground instead of their target. Rathik didn't waste a moment. He darted into the deeper shadows, disappearing from sight. The hunters cursed, realizing their prey was slipping away. Commander Jorik growled in frustration, signaling his team to adjust their positions. "Don't let him escape. He's ours." His voice was a command, but Rathik had already calculated his next move. He knew they were getting closer. The hunter's weapons were powerful, but he had something they didn't: a deep understanding of the terrain and the ability to outsmart them. Rathik moved like a shadow, his wings stretched out behind him, barely making a sound as he glided through the wet rocks. His thoughts were sharp, his instincts driving him. His heart raced, but he kept his breathing steady, even as his body screamed in protest. He had to stay ahead. The moment he faltered, it would be over. The hunters had no mercy. Up in the canopy, Rathik paused, scanning the ground below. The jungle was dense, but the hunters had advanced far enough to see through the trees with their scanning technology. Rathik's heart pounded as he saw the glow of their equipment sweep through the underbrush. They were getting closer. They weren't going to stop until they had him. From the trees, Rathik watched as the hunters moved like shadows, their armor reflecting the faint light from the storm above. They were methodical, precise in their movements, and Rathik knew they were no longer underestimating him. They had learned from their last encounter, and now they were prepared. They weren't just looking for him, they were hunting him. Rathik's breathing slowed as he considered his options. He couldn't outrun them, not with his injuries. The only chance he had was to take them by surprise. The hunters had made one mistake. They had underestimated the terrain. They didn't know the jungle like Rathik did. He had lived here all his life, and he knew the jungle better than they ever could. In a flash of decision, Rathik began to climb higher. His claws found purchase in the rough bark, his body moving with a speed and grace that was almost unnatural. Up higher, he could hear the hunters moving below, their boots hitting the wet ground with heavy thuds. They were close, too close. Rathik took a deep breath, gathering his strength. He couldn't make any mistakes. Suddenly, a piercing crack broke through the air. Rathik froze, his heart skipping a beat. A tree nearby had fallen. The hunters must have triggered it with their movements. They were using heavy, destructive equipment to clear their way through the jungle, and now they had found his position. Rathik's thoughts raced. He could hear them, the clanging of their armor and the sound of their heavy boots crushing the underbrush. He needed to act fast. Without another moment's hesitation, Rathik launched himself from the tree, his claws reaching out as he dived into the darkness below. The hunters didn't see it coming. Rathik's body slammed into one of the hunters with a sickening thud. The shock of the impact sent them both crashing to the ground. Rathik quickly regained his footing, his claws already slashing at the hunter's weapon. The hunter attempted to raise his gun, but Rathik was too fast. He knocked it aside, pushing the hunter to the ground before pouncing on him. A swift strike, and the hunter was down. But the others were coming. Rathik didn't waste a moment. He quickly scanned the area, his eyes darting from one hunter to the next. He had no time to savor his victory. Another hunter appeared from the shadows, his weapon aimed directly at Rathik. The shot rang out, but Rathik was already moving, twisting his body in a way that defied his injuries. The blast missed by inches, and Rathik pounced once again, this time knocking the weapon from the hunter's hands and sending him crashing into the jungle floor. The remaining hunters were now regrouping, realizing their mistake. They were underestimating Rathik once more. He had struck fast, and now they were losing ground. Rathik's eyes flicked to the remaining trees, considering his next move. He couldn't take them all down. Not yet. But he could make them fear him. Rathik backed away slowly, his claws glinting in the faint light. The remaining hunters, visibly shaken, moved into a defensive formation, their weapons raised. Rathik's pulse quickened. He was outnumbered, and they were closing in. But he wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the wind howling louder than ever as the storm raged on. Rathik knew he couldn't fight them all at once, but he would keep them guessing. He would keep them scared. He would make them pay for underestimating him. And so, Rathik melted back into the jungle, his form blending with the shadows. He was not done yet. The hunters thought they had him cornered, but they had no idea who they were really dealing with, and Rathik was going to make them regret their decision to come after him. The fight was far from over. The jungle was alive with sound, but Rathic's mind was dead silent. He moved through the thick undergrowth, his senses heightened, focused solely on one thing: revenge. The hunters had pushed him to the brink before. They had left him to die once, and now they had returned, underestimating him again. But this time, they wouldn't be so lucky. Rathic had learned from the first encounter. Now he was prepared. The tables had turned. Rathic's body ached with every movement. His wings still throbbed from the earlier injury, but the pain no longer mattered. His mind was focused on something far more important: the hunt. The jungle around him, dense and wild, had become his domain, his advantage. The hunters were still out there, and Rathic had learned that they were using advanced tracking technology. They would find him, sooner or later, but he wasn't going to make it easy. He would draw them in, let them think they were getting close, and then he would strike. He slowed his pace as he approached a narrow ravine, one of his favorite spots in the jungle. It was a perfect place to hide, surrounded by towering rocks and thick vines that hung like curtains. Rathic crouched low, his sharp claws digging into the earth. He could hear the hunters in the distance, their movements methodical, their voices low as they communicated. They were closing in. Rathic's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the blood pumping through his veins, the adrenaline coursing through his body. The time had come. He was ready. The hunters had no idea what was about to hit them. As the first of the hunters crept closer, Rathic remained perfectly still. He had done this before, waited for the right moment, when his prey was within range. His eyes were locked onto the hunter, the figure barely visible through the thick foliage. Rathic's muscles tensed, ready to spring. His claws were poised, his wings slightly spread, prepared to launch him into the air in a flash. He could almost hear the hunter's heartbeat, slow and steady, unaware of the danger that was closing in on him. Then, with a swift, powerful movement, Rathic leaped from his hiding spot, landing squarely on the hunter's back. The hunter barely had time to react before Rathic's claws dug into the armor, disabling the hunter's weapon and knocking him to the ground. The other hunters heard the commotion, their heads snapping around in alarm, but Rathic was already moving. He was faster, more agile than they had anticipated. Before they could fire, Rathic was on them. He darted between them, a blur of motion, his claws flashing in the dim light. The hunters tried to react, their weapons aimed, but Rathic was too quick. He slashed at the first hunter's weapon, sending it flying from his hands, and in the same motion, tackled him to the ground. The hunter struggled beneath him, but Rathic's strength was overwhelming. With one swift movement, he disabled the hunter, leaving him unconscious. A second hunter took aim at Rathic, firing a blast of energy. Rathic twisted out of the way, feeling the heat of the blast pass by him, but he was already closing in. The second hunter never had a chance. Rathic's claws found their mark, raking through the armor and incapacitating the hunter in an instant. Rathic didn't pause. He couldn't afford to. The remaining hunters were beginning to regroup. Rathic could hear their frantic orders as they tried to form a defensive line. But Rathic had no intention of letting them get the upper hand. He wasn't just a creature to be hunted. He wasn't a mere victim. He was a force, and he was about to show them just what that meant. He leaped again, higher this time, his wings spreading to give him the lift he needed. As he soared through the air, the last two hunters aimed their weapons. But Rathic was too fast, diving out of their line of fire and landing on a nearby rock. The hunters fired, but their blasts went wide, hitting nothing but air. Rathic snarled, his eyes glowing with fury. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something more. He was fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for the honor they had taken from him, and he would not let them take another step forward. One of the hunters attempted to flank him, moving to the left with a grenade in hand. Rathic saw the movement, his senses alert. He rushed forward, quicker than the hunter could react, and knocked the grenade from his hand, sending it tumbling into the jungle. The explosion rang out, a violent roar that shook the trees around them. The human fleet pressed forward, relentless in their pursuit. The Vorlax fleet was crumbling, their AI systems unable to keep up with the humans' erratic tactics. Steele could see it in the data. The Vorlax were losing control. On the ground, human soldiers were also making their move. The AI-controlled drones and infantry that had once dominated the battlefield were now falling behind, struggling to adapt to the unpredictability of human tactics. Sergeant Emma Hayes and her team continued their relentless assault, infiltrating enemy lines, planting explosives, and sabotaging equipment. Every human soldier knew that their survival depended on taking the fight directly to the AI's heart. If they could break the AI's control over the battlefield, they could turn the war in their favor. The humans had not only turned the tables, they had completely upended the Vorlax's strategy. The once feared AI was now a weakness, its once unassailable systems left in disarray by the sheer unpredictability of the human spirit. It wasn't just their technology or tactics that made them a threat. It was their unyielding will to fight, no matter the odds. As the battle continued, Steele's fleet pressed forward, delivering blow after blow to the Vorlax. The enemy's once pristine ships were now drifting, their systems in chaos, unable to coordinate or respond effectively. Steele knew the fight wasn't over, but the humans had struck back with a vengeance. In the depths of space, amid the wreckage of the once mighty Vorlax fleet, Steele stood resolute. The AI might have once been their greatest strength, but humanity had proven that there was something even more powerful, the will to never give up, and that, Steele knew, would be the key to victory. The final phase of the battle had arrived. The once mighty Vorlax Empire, crippled by the relentless attacks of the humans, was on the verge of collapse. Their advanced AI, the cornerstone of their supremacy, had been torn apart by the unpredictability and resourcefulness of the human forces. The time had come for one last, decisive push, a final showdown that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Captain Alex Steele stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars flicker as the remnants of the Vorlax fleet scattered in all directions. Their ships, once sleek and powerful, now drifted aimlessly, their systems failing one by one. The Vorlax had underestimated the human spirit, and now they were paying the price. But Steele knew that despite their triumphs, the war wasn't won yet. There was still one final challenge to face. The Vorlax had retreated to their last stronghold, a massive space station that orbited a desolate planet at the edge of the galaxy. This station was the heart of their AI-controlled empire, the central hub where their systems were monitored and maintained. If the humans could destroy it, the Vorlax would have nothing left. Their AI would collapse, and their forces would be rendered powerless. But the space station was heavily fortified, and the Vorlax were not going down without a fight. The final showdown would be brutal. Steele knew this would be the most dangerous mission of their lives, but he also knew that the humans had the one thing the Vorlax could never predict, an unyielding drive to fight for survival, no matter the cost. "Captain," a voice broke through Steele's thoughts. It was his communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah Cole. "We've received a transmission from the Vorlax. They're offering surrender." Steele's brow furrowed. He had heard the rumors about the Vorlax's willingness to negotiate when cornered, but he wasn't fooled. "Is that a trap?" he asked. "We don't know, sir," Cole replied. "The message is coming from their command station. They're offering terms, but they also claim they have a weapon capable of wiping out the human fleet." Steele's instincts screamed that this was a lie, a last-ditch effort to buy time or set a trap. The Vorlax had always been ruthless, and now that they were on the verge of defeat, they would use any tactic to survive. But Steele had learned to trust his gut, and he wasn't about to fall for their tricks. "Prepare the fleet for an all-out assault," Steele ordered, his voice cold and resolute. "We finish this now." The fleet of human ships, battered but unbowed, assembled for the final charge. Steele's crew worked in perfect synchrony, their years of training and camaraderie evident in the way they moved. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached the Vorlax space station, its looming silhouette growing larger on their screens. Every human knew what was at stake. This was the moment they had been fighting for. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. As they neared the station, the Vorlax launched their final line of defense, an army of automated drones that poured from the station's docking bays like a swarm of angry bees. These drones were fast, relentless, and deadly, but they were no match for the human fleet's coordinated assault. Steel's flagship led the charge, its guns blazing as it tore through the swarms of drones. The air was filled with the deafening sound of explosions as missiles and laser blasts collided with their targets. The Vorlax might have had AI, but humanity had something far more powerful: human ingenuity, creativity, and the ability to adapt in the heat of battle. Sergeant Emma Hayes and her team, still on the ground fighting for control of the planet below, received their orders. It was time for the ground assault. They would need to infiltrate the station's core and plant explosives to destroy the AI systems that controlled the entire Vorlax fleet. The station was a labyrinth of corridors and defenses, but Hayes had faced worse odds before. Her team was ready. With precise movements and quick thinking, the human soldiers navigated the station's defenses. They cut through security checkpoints and breached sealed doors, all while the sound of battle raged outside. The Vorlax were desperate, throwing everything they had at the humans in a last-ditch effort to protect their ally. But Hayes and her team were relentless. They moved fast, clearing obstacles and taking down enemies with swift, brutal efficiency. Meanwhile, Steel's fleet continued their assault on the station, pushing deeper into its defenses. The space station's shields flickered under the barrage of human firepower, but they held strong. The AI-controlled systems fought back, launching waves of automated defenses and countermeasures, but the humans were prepared. They had learned from every previous encounter, and they knew exactly how to exploit the weaknesses in the Vorlax's technology. "Captain, we've located the AI core," Lieutenant Cole reported. "It's deep inside the station, heavily guarded." "Proceed with caution," Steele ordered, his eyes narrowing. "We need that core destroyed if we want to win this war." Inside the station, Hayes and her team reached the AI core. The room was a massive chamber, filled with rows of machines that hummed with a low metallic sound. The air was thick with tension. This was it, the heart of the Vorlax Empire's power. A single strike could destroy everything. "Plant the charges," Hayes ordered, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. As her team set the explosives, the station's alarms blared to life. The Vorlax had detected their presence, and they were coming for them. The countdown began. The charges were set, but the station was about to unleash everything it had left. Outside, Steele's fleet pushed forward, delivering blow after blow to the station's defenses. The human ships were battered and burning, but they pressed on. The final push was underway. The station's shields were failing, and its weapons were becoming less effective with each passing second. Steele could see the end was in sight. But just as the charges were about to detonate, the station's AI, in its final moments of life, launched a desperate counterattack. A massive beam of energy shot out from the core, aimed directly at the human fleet. The beam cut through space like a knife, threatening to destroy everything in its path. Steele's eyes widened as the beam approached. They had no time to react. This was the final gambit, the last move the Vorlax could make to turn the tide in their favor. But just as the beam neared, a human ship, one of the last remaining, interposed itself between the beam and the flagship. The ship was torn apart in an instant, but its sacrifice was not in vain. The energy beam was deflected, and the human fleet pressed on. With one final, united effort, the human forces launched everything they had left at the station. The AI core exploded in a brilliant flash of light, and with it, the Vorlax Empire's grip on the galaxy was shattered. The battle was won. The humans had prevailed. Against all odds, they had struck back. And as the dust settled, Captain Steele looked out into the vastness of space, knowing that humanity's fight was far from over. But for now, they had won. The dust had barely settled from the explosion of the Vorlax I-Core when a new wave of despair hit the humans. Steele watched, his heart sinking as the communication console flashed urgently. The message on the screen was short but clear. Reinforcements were arriving. More Vorlax warships, a vast fleet larger than anything humanity had ever faced. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, a final act of desperation by the Vorlax to hold on to their dying empire. The energy from the destroyed AI core had crippled much of the station's defense systems, but the Vorlax weren't done yet. They had one last weapon, one that could turn the tide in their favor. An entire battalion of drones, faster and stronger than anything they had sent before. These machines were no longer controlled by the failing eye. They were autonomous, programmed with cold precision to annihilate anything that dared to defy the Vorlax. Captain Steele gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles turning white. His fleet was already battered, their ships scared from the earlier battle. They had no time to rest or regroup. The Vorlax were coming, and they were coming in full force. "We can't hold off that many," Lieutenant Cole said, her voice a mix of frustration and fear. "We've lost too many ships already." Steele turned to her, his gaze intense. He could feel the weight of every life that had been lost, every soldier who had fought with him. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "We've survived worse," he replied. "We'll find a way." But in his heart, Steele knew that without a miracle, the odds were stacked too high. They were outnumbered, and the Vorlax drones were too advanced for any conventional tactics. He needed to think outside the box, something unexpected, something the Vorlax wouldn't anticipate. He scanned the room, eyes landing on the one weapon humanity had kept in reserve, their unorthodox tactics. They might be the underdog in this fight, but that meant they had one thing the Vorlax couldn't predict: creativity. Steele's mind began to race as he came up with a plan. "Get me the coordinates of the Vorlax reinforcements," Steele ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. The crew jumped to work. They had to act quickly. The reinforcements were on their way, and if they didn't stop them now, the fight would be over. Steele needed to buy time, and he needed to use every trick he had up his sleeve. Meanwhile, Sergeant Hayes, leading a group of human soldiers on the ground, was preparing for a final assault. They were far from the action in space, but Hayes knew that this was a fight for survival. If they didn't stop the Vorlax on the ground, nothing would matter. The drones would come for them, and they wouldn't stand a chance. "We've been given a second shot," Hayes muttered to her team, her voice filled with grim determination. "We're not going down without a fight." Her team nodded in agreement, their faces grim but resolute. They had seen the horrors of war, but they had also seen what humans were capable of when pushed to the limit. Hayes and her soldiers weren't about to let their comrades in space face this threat alone. Steele's plan was simple yet daring. He knew that the Vorlax were highly dependent on their technology, on the precision of their drones, but they had never encountered something like humanity's ingenuity. The Vorlax thought they had won. They thought they had wiped out enough of humanity's forces to crush their spirit. But Steele had one trick left, something he knew could turn the tide in their favor. "Prepare the EMP devices," Steele ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "We're going to disrupt their drones." The electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, was a weapon humanity had perfected. It could disable electronic systems in a wide radius, rendering the drones useless. But there was a catch. They couldn't use it too early. If they activated it too soon, they would take out their own ships and soldiers as well. Timing was everything. Mission, and the others who had fallen along the way. Their bravery had given humanity a chance at survival. It was a debt he could never repay, but it was one he would carry with him always. In the days that followed, the humans began to rebuild. The damage to their ships was extensive, but the engineering teams worked tirelessly, repairing the vessels and ensuring they were ready for whatever came next. The war had taken its toll, But there was a newfound sense of unity among the soldiers, a bond forged in the heat of battle. They had proven that they could fight back, that they could face the most powerful forces in the galaxy and come out on top. Now they had to ensure that they were ready for whatever the Vorlax or any other enemies might throw at them. While the humans worked on their preparations, Steel met with the leaders of the remaining factions, forming alliances that would ensure their collective survival. It was a difficult task. The galaxy was filled with distrust, and many of the factions were reluctant to work with humanity. But Steel knew that this was their best chance. They needed each other if they were going to stand a chance against the threats that were on the horizon. Steel's efforts paid off. Slowly, over time, humanity earned the respect of their allies. They were no longer seen as just another primitive species. They were warriors. They had proven themselves on the battlefield. And now, their allies were willing to trust them. The fight against the Vorlax had brought humanity to the forefront of galactic politics, but it had also opened their eyes to the greater dangers that lay ahead. As the months passed, Steel's team worked on new technologies, weapons, and strategies to defend the colonies. They studied the Vorlax technology, learning from their enemies, and applying that knowledge to strengthen their own forces. The lessons learned from the battle would not go to waste. The humans were determined not to be caught off guard again. But it wasn't just about weapons and tactics. Steel knew that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to adapt, to think creatively, and to never give up, no matter the odds. That spirit had carried them through the darkest days of the war, and it would carry them through whatever came next. In one of the quieter moments, Steel stood in the command center, gazing out at the stars once more. The war with the Vorlax was over, but the road ahead was uncertain. Still, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The kind of hope that came from knowing they had the strength to face any challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. "We did it," Steel said quietly to himself. "We turned the tide." It wasn't just the victory over the Vorlax that filled him with hope. It was the fact that humanity had proven its worth. They had fought against overwhelming odds and come out victorious. That kind of resilience was something no AI, no technologically advanced alien race, could ever predict. It was something that would be their greatest weapon moving forward. In the following weeks, Steel received word from other human colonies scattered across the galaxy. They had heard of the victory and were inspired by the bravery of the soldiers who had fought. Many had joined the fight, ready to stand alongside their fellow humans. The unity of humanity was growing stronger, and the lessons of the past were shaping a new future. Steel knew that the war wasn't truly over. The galaxy was vast, and the threats to humanity were far from gone. But as he looked out at the horizon, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. They had earned their place among the stars, and they would fight for their future, no matter what challenges lay ahead. For the first time in a long while, Steel allowed himself a moment of peace. The battle had been hard, and the road ahead would be even harder. But humanity had proven that, no matter what, they would rise again. And with that, the future looked brighter than it had in a long time. There was hope, a glimmer of it, shining through the darkness. But Earth's defenders weren't just waiting around. The soldiers, equipped with advanced weapons of their own, stolen from previous alien encounters, launched their counterattack. The battle wasn't one-sided, as the humans used every trick they had learned to fight back. They weren't as technologically advanced as the aliens, but they had experience, a deep understanding of their own planet's terrain, and a drive that could never be matched by cold, calculating machines. In the heart of one devastated city, a group of human soldiers led by Captain Ramirez stood at the front lines, their rifles raised. Ramirez, a seasoned fighter, had seen the worst of battles. His eyes were filled with a quiet determination as he surveyed the battlefield. His soldiers, a mix of young recruits and veterans, followed his lead. They moved swiftly, coordinating their attacks on the alien robots, using guerrilla tactics to strike fast and disappear before the aliens could retaliate. "On my mark," Ramirez said, his voice steady and calm, though his heart raced. "Take them down." The soldiers broke into action, firing their weapons at the approaching alien machines. Their bullets bounced off the invaders' armor, but the humans knew their goal wasn't to destroy them outright. Instead, they were focusing on one thing: disabling the machines long enough to take them down in hand-to-hand combat. As the first wave of invaders pushed forward, the humans used everything they had at their disposal: homemade explosive devices, remote drones, and even improvised barricades slowed the alien advance. One young soldier, just a teenager, climbed onto a rooftop and fired a rocket launcher at the nearest warship. The rocket hit its mark, creating a massive explosion. The ship's shields flickered and weakened, though the alien vessel did not fall. But it was enough to give the humans a window of opportunity. From the skies, human fighter jets, equipped with alien weaponry, engaged the warships in a desperate aerial battle. The jets darted and weaved, using the terrain to their advantage as they fired laser-guided missiles at the invader ships. One by one, the alien warships began to fall from the sky, their sleek forms crashing to the earth in burning ruins. But the war wasn't over yet. The aliens had reinforcements. More warships arrived, each one packed with an army of robotic soldiers, ready to finish what had started. They were relentless. The human resistance had barely managed to hold the line, but with each passing hour, they were slowly being pushed back. In the streets of the city, civilians were running for cover, seeking shelter wherever they could find it. Some were helping to evacuate the injured, while others joined the battle with whatever tools they could find. A group of engineers worked tirelessly, creating makeshift weapons to stop the invasion. They didn't have the power of the aliens, but they had their intelligence, their ability to innovate, and their refusal to give up. Amidst the chaos, a young girl named Emma, one of the children who had proven their strength earlier, found herself in the heart of the battle. She wasn't a soldier, but her skills were needed. As the alien machines advanced on a group of trapped civilians, Emma sneaked past the enemy lines, using the shadows to her advantage. She had memorized every escape route, every hidden passage in the city. She was the key to getting people out of harm's way. Using a combination of stealth and quick thinking, Emma disabled several of the alien robots, drawing the attention of their sensors away from the civilians. She moved swiftly, staying one step ahead of the invaders. She was just a child, but she fought with the heart of a warrior, the same heart that had been passed down through generations of humans who had fought to protect their home. The fighting grew fiercer as night fell. The city was in flames, but the humans didn't retreat. They didn't give up. They fought with everything they had left, because they had no other choice. Earth was their home, and they would not allow it to fall. Captain Ramirez, leading his squad, came across a new wave of alien soldiers. The odds were against them, but they pushed forward, determined to defend their world. The battle was intense, with hand-to-hand combat erupting in the streets, soldiers and robots clashing in an unrelenting storm of violence. But despite the overwhelming odds, the humans held their ground. Each time they were pushed back, they came back with renewed strength. As the sun began to rise, the alien forces, weakened and disoriented by the relentless human resistance, began to retreat. They were not used to this. They had expected an easy victory, but the humans had given them something they had never anticipated: resilience. The aliens, for the first time, began to realize that Earth was not a planet to conquer. It was a planet to respect. The battle wasn't won yet, but humanity had taken the first step. They had fought back, with courage and determination, against the invaders. Earth had shown the aliens what humans were truly capable of. And this was only the beginning. The fight was far from over, but one thing was certain: Earth would not fall without a fight, and the invaders would learn, the hard way, that the human spirit could never be broken. The morning after the battle dawned gray and cold. The remnants of the previous night's chaos lay scattered across the cities: burned buildings, destroyed vehicles, and the still bodies of those who had fallen. The silence was almost eerie, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. But there was something else in the air, a sense of change, a quiet realization that had begun to settle across the world. The invaders had come, expecting easy victories, but what they had encountered was far beyond their expectations. Humanity had shown them a resilience they had never seen before, a fighting spirit that could not be broken. The alien forces, despite their superior technology and advanced weaponry, had been forced to retreat. It was a victory, but the humans knew it was only the beginning. The invaders weren't gone for good. They would be back. But for the moment, the Earth stood tall, battered but unbroken. The human legacy had just begun. In the aftermath, people took stock of what had happened. The world's governments, once fractured and divided, had united in the face of the threat. Leaders who had spent years at odds with one another now worked side by side, focused on a single goal: rebuilding and preparing for what would come next. The civilian population, too, had proved itself in ways no one had anticipated. Ordinary men, women, and children had picked up weapons, fought in the streets, and stood their ground. They had fought not just for survival, but for each other, for their homes, for the future of the planet. As the survivors went about the work of cleaning up and rebuilding, there was an undercurrent of something deeper. Fear. It was there, in the eyes of the people. The invasion had left its mark, and the memory of the alien assault would not fade quickly. But there was also something else, something more powerful than fear: respect. The invaders had come expecting an easy conquest, but instead they had faced the full force of humanity's will to survive. And they had learned, perhaps too late, that humans would never go down without a fight. News of humanity's victory spread quickly across the galaxy. Other alien civilizations, who had been watching the invasion from the shadows, took note. They had heard the rumors of Earth's strength, of the humans who had driven back the invaders with sheer determination. No longer were humans seen as primitive or weak. Now, they were feared. The galaxy had always underestimated Earth, assuming that humans were just another species to be conquered. But those assumptions had been shattered. On the alien homeworlds, leaders convened, discussing the implications of the Earth's unexpected resistance. The invaders had underestimated the planet's inhabitants, and now they had to decide how to deal with the humans. Some suggested wiping them out entirely, eradicating the threat before it could grow. Others, however, argued for a more cautious approach. The humans had proven their ability to adapt and fight, and there was something about their spirit that was difficult to ignore. Some said that it was time to recognize the strength of Earth's people, to form alliances rather than engage in senseless wars. Meanwhile, back on Earth, people were still trying to grasp the scale of what had just happened. There were those who had lost everything: family, friends, homes, and the weight of their grief was heavy. But there were also those who had found strength in the darkest moments, people who had risen to the occasion and shown what humans were capable of. They had fought for survival, and they had won. For them, there was no going back to the way things were before. They had seen the horrors the aliens were capable of, and now they understood that their survival depended not just on their ability to defend themselves, but on their willingness to stand united in the face of adversity. Captain Ramirez, the leader of the human soldiers who had played a crucial role in the defense of Earth, stood on the edge of a ruined city, looking out over the horizon. His uniform was torn and dirty, a testament to the battles he had fought. But his eyes, though tired, were filled with determination. He had lost men under his command, people who had fought bravely and paid the ultimate price. The weight of their deaths pressed heavily on his heart. But there was something else, too, a sense of pride. Humanity had fought back. They had proven themselves. And now, they would be ready for whatever came next. Behind him, a group of soldiers and civilians had gathered, each of them carrying the scars of the battle in their own way. Some were injured, others were still in shock, but they all shared one thing in common. They were survivors. They had faced the alien invaders and lived to tell the tale. And though the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, they knew one thing for sure: humanity would not go down without a fight. As the sun began to rise higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the battlefield, the survivors made their way back to their communities. The rebuilding process had begun, but it wasn't just about rebuilding physical structures. It was about rebuilding hope. The people of Earth had come together in a way that had never been seen before. And as they moved forward, they carried with them a legacy of fear, but also of respect, and most importantly, of survival. The children, who had once been underestimated, now stood as a symbol of that legacy. They were the future of Earth, and the future had never looked brighter. Their bravery, their ability to adapt, and their fierce determination had proven that Earth's strength lay not just in its technology or its soldiers, but in the hearts of its people. And as the rest of the galaxy watched, they knew that Earth was no longer a planet to be taken lightly. Humanity had survived, and in doing so, they had earned their place among the stars. The fear that once existed had transformed into something else, something the aliens had not counted on. They had learned to respect Earth and the humans who called it home. The battle was far from over, but Earth had shown that it would never surrender. It would fight, it would survive, and it would rise again, stronger than ever. The legacy of humanity was only just beginning, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson it had learned. The days after the battle passed in a haze of recovery and reflection. Earth had been forever changed by the invasion, but in a way that no one could have predicted. The war was over, the enemy retreating into the vast unknown of the galaxy, but the victory felt hollow for many. The cost had been high, too high. Families had been torn apart, cities had been destroyed, and countless lives had been lost. Yet, through all the devastation, there was a strange sense of pride. The humans had fought back against a technologically superior force, and in the end, they had emerged victorious. As the dust settled, the survivors began to rebuild their lives. The government had rallied together, setting aside old differences in the wake of the invasion. Nations once divided by politics and borders now stood united, their collective focus on recovery and defense. The cities began to take shape again, their streets filled with workers, soldiers, and civilians alike, each contributing in their own way. There was a sense of unity in the air, a shared understanding that the survival of humanity now depended on the strength of the people as a whole. But even as the Earth healed, the rest of the galaxy watched closely. The aliens who had,